Hello, friends. Welcome back to Great People Interview Series. Today we have with us Jonny. Welcome, Jonny.
Hi, very nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. And hello, everybody that's watching.
Great. Well, Jonny is the Chief Growth Officer at Speero. It's a consultancy. And if you're an entrepreneur and through businesses, if you're thinking about growth, scale, you're at the right place today because we're going to discuss a term called growth experimentation. So, Jonny, um, well, give us a little bit of a background how you got into growth experimentation in the first place, and then, of course, please define for the audience what exactly is growth experimentation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I've had a long career, always in fields relating to digital innovation and marketing innovation and things like that. I started out originally in what would today be called data science, and then moved into digital. And in around about 18 years ago, Google launched what was then called Google Website Optimizer, which was the first widely available A/B testing platform. And I was instantly hooked on the idea that you can run tests to understand what's right and what works. And I've been in a variety of different roles since then, but always with this passion for how you use evidence-based approaches to validate what you can do and what will work and what will drive innovation and growth. And along the way, I've ended up becoming more senior in particular roles. Recently, I was group product director of a big fashion retailer. And so I've kind of gone from using that as a sort of a small scale tactical tool to the idea that the same principle and the same concept, evidence-based decision making, can help with much bigger sort of strategic questions. And that's really where growth experimentation comes in. So the starting point really is very simply that we cannot guess how to develop our businesses and how to change things and how to respond to customers. It feels like you can, but ultimately most businesses have hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers, and you simply cannot second guess how people are going to react to things. It's impossible. You might feel like you do. You feel like you know your customers and things like that, but it's a nonsense. Like you could think of a football stadium full of people. How can you possibly know every single one of those people and how they're going to react to things? You can't. So that's the starting point. It's not possible to guess how to grow and innovate your business. You can have great ideas, and that's absolutely fine, but ultimately you need to validate things with them. And most businesses don't work like that. Most businesses operate by having opinions. People are ultimately kind of employed by businesses for things they've done in the past, and so they have to bring their past experience and opinion to the table. And so that's why there's a lot of opinion in business, but ultimately it doesn't really get anywhere. And the analogy that I love to use is the Apollo space mission. So if you take something like that, that was arguably the greatest technological and scientific achievement of modern civilization. But they didn't just start out by listening to JFK say, let's get somebody to the moon and back, and go, I know exactly how to do that. We'll just build a big rocket. They used a careful process of testing different things and different concepts and having coordinated learning and coordinated iterative development processes to figure out the right way to do it and invest the time and the risk in the right way to do it. And that's ultimately what growth experimentation refers to. It's the idea that you can take your strategy and your vision for your business and break it down into manageable, different testable things, and to figure out where you should invest your time, which of those things are going to give you the greatest return, and therefore how do you do it as well? What are the right ways to do that sort of stuff? And it's as simple as that in a way. You don't need to get hung up all the time necessarily on the techniques for doing it. the approach and the spirit of it is the most important thing.
Yeah, definitely. And some of the things people use is A/B testing. Um, so what's your view on how you suggest people should go about, growth experimentation in that context?
Yeah. So it's unfortunately, the modern business world has a lot of the time got itself into the belief that experimentation equals A/B testing. So a lot of people will be aware of the idea of A/B testing, and experimentation vendors who provide the software have sort of furthered this belief by going around telling everybody you can just put a tool on your site and test things and stuff like that. But A/B testing is a very valuable and very great form of validation, but it is only one type of validation. And if I go back to that space analogy, not a huge amount of what would have been tested in the development of the space program would have been anything like a statistically significant controlled 50-50 split test. It doesn't make it any less of an experiment. Science, the science world generally doesn't kind of go, oh, we can't do a really statistically significant experiment, so we just won't bother. We'll just guess instead. They find the best source of data, the best, most confident data they possibly can under the circumstances, and that serves a purpose. So that number one, experimentation doesn't need to mean A/B testing. There are lots of other types of validation that you can do. And number two, what really is the description of experimentation is the overall approach that you take to taking strategy and vision and figuring out in a sort of a critical thinking methodology how you break that down into different testable things and how to explore those different areas in coordinated ways. And that's really what experimentation means. So at the heart of that is what we call the growth experimentation operating system. And that refers really to, number one, a system, a piece of software that is how you track your goals and objectives, how they translate into different initiatives, and then to manage those different experiments, whatever kind of experiments they might be, and very importantly, the feedback that you get from them. So to be able to manage how you create feedback loops where you are exploring different areas, learning from the feedback that you get from the market in different ways, and then learning how to adapt and how to create different theories around things. So, and that's both a piece of software, but it's also a way of running the business, a way of managing the business, how different people are working on different things and how they understand what everybody else is doing and all that sort of stuff.
So it's kind of shift in our thinking, isn't it? So could you just elaborate how, when you said, tactics to strategy and trices to systems, can you just elaborate in this context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we take the example of how a lot of companies approach it at the moment, A/B testing has always sort of has always been known in relation to conversion optimization. So what typically happens is that a business, let's take an e-commerce retail business, they will have an internal IT or product team that are developing features for the website, and based purely on things that people think are a good idea. So somebody might say, we need to do personalization, we need to build personalization into our product pages or product listings pages, and then that becomes a feature, and somebody goes out, buys a piece of software and figures out how to implement it, and at no point has anybody really figured out whether that was a good thing to do or not. It just starts with the belief that, well, our competitors are doing it, so we should do it. And meanwhile, they might have a CRO team who are testing very small aspects of user experience. So they'll be kind of playing around with testing buttons and layouts of pages and things like that. And that is very common. That's how, in one way, shape, or form, experimentation gets approached. That it's a sort of a separate thing, and it's about minor optimization of user experience. But when you stand back and look at it, you think ultimately all it really is, all experimentation is figuring out whether things are the right thing to do, and figuring out whether you should invest in them or not. So why are you only testing really small things and meanwhile just doing all this other massive stuff? And that doesn't just apply to kind of digital stuff. So, there are all sorts of kind of big decisions that are made in businesses that nobody would ever think to really test in any sense. So, should we launch into new geographical territories? Should we completely cut out this whole product line? Should we acquire this different company to get into a new range of services? Things like that. These are enormous decisions that get made. And very rarely has anybody ever considered actually testing these. At best, they might pay a big four consultancy to kind of tell them whether or not it's the right thing to do. But that's not testing. It's just somebody else's opinion.
Yeah.
And all of these things can be approached if you do it in the right way as an experiment. The big question is, what's the smallest possible thing that we can do that demonstrates whether or not there is some legs in this and whether we should invest further time in it. And so that is strategic experimentation. And the CRO thing, the little team sitting in the corner messing around with buttons, that's tactical experimentation. So I think that's probably a good way to understand the difference there that we mean.
Yeah. So when you said, I think let's pick up on that example when you said, it's a company which is to decide whether to go into another geography. And yes, we can't really be thinking of testing, and we don't want to be going on the basis of assumptions. So from a growth experimentation's perspective, what would you advise such a company? How do they approach this experimentation?
Yeah. So the first question is always, as I mentioned, what's the smallest, least effort, cheapest thing that we can do that just demonstrates or not the viability of this idea? So if you take that example of, should we launch into a new country, a new market? The very first thing that you would hope anyone would really do, which I'm sure most people would do, is some kind of rudimentary business case analysis that looks at the volume of potential traffic in that country, competition and stuff like that. So that's basic stuff, but that is the smallest thing that you can do. And in some cases, you would do that and it wouldn't really make sense anymore. Like, you would go, actually, there's like enormous competition from some very established players. It's not going to work. But then if that does prove possible, then there are all sorts of sort of small things you might do, like just running basic paid marketing campaigns in the market where the traffic is being sent to a different country website, and you just need to think about how you might ship to those markets and stuff like that. I mean, most people would be able to ship internationally anyway. This all really depends on the type of business that you are, but it'd be very low effort to just simply target another market and make it look like you have presence in that market, just to see how many people respond, and that might give you some indication as to the level of response rates in that market versus different market. Obviously, you won't have much brand awareness, so it's going to be low, but it starts to give you clues, and then it might also give you a clue as to what level of brand marketing you might need to do. So you're building up a picture of what needs to happen, and then eventually, potentially, you're looking at creating a dedicated country-specific landing page. Having more having changing your pricing into local currency pricing, blah blah. So and this would go on until eventually perhaps you are building a distribution center in that country and blah blah blah. But this is a very sort of iterative process. And going back to the space example, again, I said, they didn't just build a big rocket and blast it off into space. The very first thing was probably something akin to a firework, just to see how that worked.
Yeah.
And then probes and blah, blah, blah. And so it's the same sort of process that, you can approach anything like that if you just approach it in the right way and break it down in the right way. But most businesses don't have the infrastructural process to be able to do that. So they're not set up to be able to do that. And if you're exploring a lot of different ideas, you need to be able to manage all of those different ideas in that way. So you might have 10 different ideas, all of which are going through this stage of development, and some of it, it's like a bit of a horse race. Some of them will get through the hurdles and other ones won't. So you'll start focusing on those ones and then not those ones, and then maybe some new ideas come in. And that again goes back to this idea of an operating system. You need to have a system and a process that allows you to manage these different ideas and the different stages that they're at, and to gather learning from all of them. Because also, what each of these things will tell you is can be rolled up to kind of bigger theories about how the business should operate. You might find actually international expansion is not a great way for us to grow. So maybe there's something different. Maybe going into kind of different product lines in our existing markets might be better, or whatever. So, and again, the point is that it doesn't matter what these things are. There's always a way of breaking things down into more manageable, testable assumptions.
Well, what looks like as a great way to go forward, a great way for businesses to adopt this change in the mindset and these additional processes, and of course the help from your kind of consultancy and the businesses. I'm sure there would be some challenges in your business. So what are those?
Yeah, it's very highly dependent on the type of the business, the size of the business. Like a startup that is just kind of hungry for growth is totally different to like a bigger, more established company that has seen declining revenues and needs to get back to growth and all that kind of stuff. So it's super dependent on the nature of the business, the specifics of the business. But more often than not, the way we approach it is through some kind of small trial proof of concept approach. And most people have heard of the concept of a flywheel, but it's really key here. It's the idea that you won't really be able to get a lot of buy-in and traction and understanding from people in the business without some concrete example to kind of use. And I could go into a business and present conceptually about all this stuff, but that is in no way, shape as powerful as if I said, here's this specific business challenge that you have, and here's a concrete way that you might test it. Here's 10 ideas that you could test, and these are what the tests would look like, and here's what the system that you might put it into looks like. And that is, shows people this is how this might actually work. And then they can start talking about how different people would work with it, and how to scale it, and how we might run these things and stuff like that. So I would say in whichever the type of business, the best thing is to create some sort of real trial version of it. And usually the best way is to think of what is a really significant problem or question that the business is grappling with at the moment, and use that, and to just go through that process of critical thinking that breaks it down into the different assumptions around it, how you might test those different assumptions, and so forth. And then you can say, look, here's this problem that we've got, look at this approach. And even if you haven't got to the stage of actually being able to run any tests, it will start the conversation of, this maybe is a good way to think about this. So Again, very dependent on the business, but in some way, shape, or form, we're kind of trying to germinate conversation by just coming up with some very contextual proof of concept example of how it would work.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that was an amazing conversation. And as we come towards the end of our interview, can I request you to give some advice to the entrepreneurs who are listening to this interview?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, everything I'm talking about, it's easy to think that applies to bigger, more established businesses that have got more time and that have more resources. It absolutely isn't. It's what I'm describing is really the spirit of experimentation. Anyone starting their own business will likely have read the Lean Startup, and it's really the same concept that is explained in the Lean Startup of how you have ideas, seek feedback that it's the right idea, that you've got product market fit, and pivot and adapt if you don't. The only problem with the Lean Startup is it doesn't really tell you how to do that. Like it explains that that's a good concept, but it doesn't explain how to do that. And most people will end up sort of flailing and just kind of vaguely trying stuff and see what happens. But there does need to be some kind of organization and coordination behind that. Otherwise, you are just kind of from one day to the next going, well, let's try this, let's try that. It's much better if you can have some planning around how you approach taking the big ideas that you've got and testing different things and prioritizing those different tests and how you learn from them and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't have to be massively complicated, but it's just having the concept of organization, coordination, and a system around it. So that would be my number one bit of advice.
Well, uh, you said that, but I think I still felt that this is for big companies, and you said, well, actually, even the small to medium size businesses can probably benefit from what you do. So,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from the concept that I'm talking about, I mean, another way to look at it is like just as an individual person, I could think, I want to improve my health. There are several different ways I might go about that, that I could experiment with. I could try things. But, you know, should I just sort of, when I remember, try one thing, when I remember, try another thing? Or could I be a little bit more systematic about going, well, I'm going to try this for a week, then that for a week, then that for a week? So it's as simple as that, really. From in terms of us actually supporting people with it,
yeah,
obviously we're a fee charging consultancy, so there's going to be a level where a very small business wouldn't make sense for them to start employing an external consultancy. So that's the only kind of restriction there. But yeah, we do work with growing and small businesses that are looking to go to the next level of how to really accelerate growth as well.
fantastic. Well, that's amazing concept that we discussed, and I'm sure many businesses would benefit from this discussion and probably think differently to their approach to scale and growth. Thank you once again for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Johnny.